Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to this little webinar today. My name is Audrey Pe. I am the founder and executive director of WiTech, which is short for Women in Technology. It is a global youth-led nonprofit organization based in the Philippines, but with 15 chapters spread out across 6 different countries around the world. We aim to educate, inspire, and empower youth to break gender barriers and use tech to make a difference in society. When I'm not working on WeTech, I'm a freshman at Stanford University, where I intend to major in either science, technology, and society or symbolic systems. I say intend to because at Stanford, we don't need to declare our majors until our second year. So, fun fact. Okay, so let's get right into it. How did I start this nonprofit? How did I begin this nonprofit journey at the age of 15? And how did WeTech bring its initiatives from outside of from the Philippines to different parts of the world? Now, my story really starts in a middle school classroom. In the Philippines, where I was born and raised, we have this DepEd, which is the Department of Education mandated computer class. This computer class doesn't have anything to do actually with programming. It's more on how to use Microsoft Office, like Word, PowerPoint, Excel. And I honestly did not find that very exciting until one day my teacher decided to go completely off curriculum and introduced us to this game where a snake had to navigate a maze using blocks that represented lines of code. And I remember thinking for the first time that wow, this is what the social media, the technology that I had pretty much relied on a day-to-day basis was made of code. And I wanted to dive deeper into this field of technology and learn more about it. When I asked my teacher if we would have more opportunities to learn how to code, she told me that it isn't part of the Philippine computer curriculum. So we wouldn't be touching the topic any further, but I could go online and look for a bunch of free tutorials there. So that's what I did for the rest of middle school and early high school. When I wasn't in clubs, when I wasn't doing other extracurriculars or studying, I would be sat in front of my laptop and I'd quite literally Google how to learn how to code, free computer science tutorials. Through that process, I found a bunch of free resources like Codecademy, Code.org, and Harvard's introductory computer science lectures on YouTube. All of these things out there for free. Fast forward to high school and ninth grade specifically, when I started getting asked the very scary question, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to major in? What schools do you want to apply to? And to a lot of those questions, I told people that I wanted to go into tech, maybe something along the lines of CS. I was met with a lot of mixed reactions to my surprise. My peers told me that I was very brave to want to go into tech because in the entire ninth grade, I was the only girl that wanted to do so. I was one of two girls in the entire ninth grade class that wanted to go into STEM, the other girl wanting to be a doctor, so very different from my aspirations in tech. The guys, on the other hand, told me, "Oh, Audrey, we didn't know you're into video games." Because to them, technology exclusively meant video games, whereas I was already thinking about tech for social good, the applications of tech in making a better society, that sort of thing. But the feedback that really hit me the hardest was when a teacher told me, "Oh, Audrey, you don't seem like a good fit for tech." And when I heard those words and I really thought about them, I realized that at the moment I kind of agreed with my teacher in that I couldn't imagine myself being a good fit for tech. Because when I thought of successful people in the tech industry, I thought of Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Elon Musk. So basically, middle aged white guys that I had very little in common with. And I thought to myself, where are the women in tech? Like they have to be somewhere. And where are the women in tech of color? So I wanted to find their stories. I wanted to find out about this gender gap in tech. And I went to my favorite resource ever, Google, and I quite literally Googled women in tech. And I found out about this massive gender gap, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. I read that according to the Philippine Startup Report, only 18% of tech companies back home in the Philippines were founded by women. And I read that according to pay scale, internationally, women in tech are paid 18 to 22% less than their male counterparts. In hindsight, looking back, I think I was around 15 at the time that I was reading those stats. I was in my freshman or like sophomore year of high school. I could have easily said, okay, like maybe let's not go into a field where I'll be underrepresented and underpaid. I still have time, I'm young, maybe I can pivot into a different field. But I was and still am very, very stubborn. So after reading those stats, instead of getting discouraged about entering tech, I got really, really angry. I thought, why is it that just because of gender, men and women are given different opportunities, different pay in the tech scene? And why is it that this field that's being kind of heralded as our future, um, something that's only really accessible to half of the world's population? So I had all these questions and I had really this desire to do something about the gender gap. And that was what led to WiTech. So WiTech was a blog that I founded back in 2016 to feature the different stories of women in tech who I connected with via platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram. I would quite literally go on the hashtag women in tech on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I would cold message all these women and say, "Hi, my name is Audrey. I'm 15 and I'm looking for role models in the tech industry. Would you be willing to answer some of my questions? And I'll write up your story into a little blog post that can hopefully inspire more young girls to enter the field of tech." What I loved so much about starting the VTech blog wasn't just about learning about these women's stories, but just seeing the excitement on their faces as I hopped on calls with them, as they told me that nobody had really asked them to share their stories before. And slowly but surely, WeTech evolved from a blog into a community organization that hosted the first Women in Tech conference for students and by students in the Philippines. As much as I loved writing blog content, at some point I really fell into a slump. And that I wondered if the articles that was coming out of the WeTech blog were actually doing anything concrete to help close the gender gap in tech. A lot of people were saying that these interviews really inspired them, but I thought, what good is inspiration if it doesn't lead to action? So at a hackathon that I was in about, I think, 2016, 2017, I grouped together with a bunch of girls that were also at that hackathon. We all mutually complained about the lack of representation in tech, and I joked, why don't we just start our own conference about diversity and accessibility and technology? And that's where the Women in Tech conference came about. We partnered with Accenture Philippines and were able to host the one-day conference in their newly renovated HQ. We brought together women in tech as young as middle schoolers, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, and as old, I guess, as like college students that were already looking for job opportunities. What was so amazing about that experience of hosting WitCon for short was being able to see the pure excitement on the faces of young girls like Mona and Munchkin in the picture, contrasted with college age students that were also learning how to code for the first time, and seeing like the collaboration and just the sheer excitement about tech in that room is something that I don't think I'll ever be able to fully put into words. After the conference, Mona, the girl in pink, reached out to me via Facebook saying that she wanted to write about me for her school's essay. And when I asked her what the essay was about, apparently the prompt was to write about somebody that inspires you. And that almost made me cry because I realized that that's what we were able to do slowly but surely with VTech. We were able to turn inspiration into action through providing young girls like Mona opportunities to engage with technology and feel like they themselves could be successful people in tech in the future. Despite the successes that we felt through this Women in Tech conference, my team and I thought to ourselves that we felt like we weren't really doing enough to help the tech scene in the Philippines because we noticed that most of the participants at this conference came from middle to upper class backgrounds and that they could attend this Women in Tech conference because they found out about it online, because they had the internet connection, the desktop or laptop or smartphone to be able to access opportunities online. And they were able to travel all the way to Metro Manila, the capital of the Philippines, to attend this conference. And we know that in a country like the Philippines, that is very much still a developing country with over like 7,000 islands, we knew that just this one event wasn't going to be accessible to everyone. And that's where the idea of the Women in Tech Teach program, We Teach for short, came about. My team and I thought about how we were empowering, yes, girls in tech. But as much as we were proud of advocating for girls in tech, we realized that in the Philippines, not everybody gets access to technology to begin with. And we wanted to be able to make sure that, yes, our advocacy centered around empowering girls in tech, but also empowering youth of all socioeconomic strands. We want to help build a future where all youth, regardless of their gender or socioeconomic status, have access to tech and the potential to use it for social good. We wanted to really level the playing field of the tech industry. And that began with going into low-income communities like Marawi, pictured in the slide, that have barely any access to tech as a whole. A lot of these students that we taught introductory CS and introductory Microsoft Office to had never used laptops before. We had to really go back to basics and teach them how to use the laptop keys, how to use a mouse, how to power on and off a laptop. And in that experience, I really realized how lucky a lot of us are, I think, to be able to access the technology, to be able to go on things like Zoom calls and webinars, because I think we tend to forget that not everybody has access to that, especially when we're surrounded in communities where everybody has more or less the same level of access. Marawi was actually an area that was bombed back in 2017 due to suspected terrorists. And a lot of these students were lagging behind in their education because of almost a year-long school suspension due to the bombing. Just seeing these students get back on track using technology, learning to type up essays on a Word document instead of having to write things by hand, was really exciting for us because we were able to see firsthand the impact that technology can have in accelerating students' education and really empowering them and getting them excited about going back to school. And we didn't stop from there. After that Women in Tech Teach program, we decided to launch more across the country. We went to different areas like Rizal and Bohol, again, communities with little to no access to technology. Another thing that I forgot to mention about the Marawi project was that when we went to that community, of the 37 students that we taught basic CS, only one student had ever heard of programming before. And when we asked them, oh, what does it mean to code, to program? He said, oh, it's just that thing you type really fast, right? And to him, like that was like the bare minimum knowledge he had about tech. And although my team and I laughed about it at first, the more you think about it, it's kind of sad that that was the highest extent of knowledge about tech, about programming in that community. And we really want to change that. So besides our Women in Tech conference, our teaching programs, we also have roadshows wherein we go to different public and private high schools and elementary schools across the Philippines, and we talk about what tech is. We want to normalize technology as a potential field for a lot of students to go into, because in the Philippines, there's very much a stereotype that when you go into STEM, you either become a doctor or an engineer. So we bring in guest speakers like Chiara Ledesma, who is a data scientist and a fresh college graduate, and we have her talk about her story of going into technology despite having and majoring in CS in college, despite having never coded before going into college. So stories like hers are what we showcase in the roadshow, and we also talk about different opportunities to get involved with tech outside of the classroom through organizations like WiTech. As a whole, we've brought tech to over 100 students from low-income communities, and we've impacted over 1,000. So this isn't updated, but over 1,200 students by our events. We've also, in that journey, been able to bring WiTech to different parts of the world, which is really exciting. And that's something that we never fully planned to do at the beginning of WiTech. This was a purely organic process that came out of people messaging us from different parts of the world after seeing our social media posts and asking, are you going to bring a Women in Tech conference to India or to Liberia? And when we'd say that, unfortunately, most of our team is anchored in the Philippines, so we aren't able to do that, we turned the question around and asked if people would be willing to collaborate with us and bring WiTech to their communities. And that was how we ended up bringing WiTech to different parts of the world. And what ties all of these chapters together isn't just a desire to break gender barriers in tech, but also just like that inherent principle of equality and wanting to make sure that tech isn't something limited by somebody's gender or socioeconomic status. We bring out Women in Tech conferences, webinars, teach programs to these different communities, and we share the resources that we've accrued in WiTech Philippines to different chapters so that they don't have to face the same starting obstacles that we did as a nonprofit when we began in the Philippines with like little to no experience about how to start one. Through the pandemic, we've also had a fundraiser with the Unang Hakbang Foundation, and we've been able to provide for different laptops and tablets for low-income students that were at risk of dropping out of school due to the lack of tech equipment. So that's kind of WeTech's story as a whole. That's how we've grown from a blog into an organization, into a registered nonprofit with chapters around the world. And if there's anything I hope that you take away from my story, I hope it's that you don't need to have this huge vision at the beginning. Like, I didn't expect at the beginning of WeTech for the blog to turn into anything more than a blog. Instead, what I had in mind was a key problem that I wanted to help solve, and that was closing the gender and accessibility gaps in technology. More important than the actual, I think, step by step, like 5-year plan, if you're thinking that far ahead, what's more important than that is just knowing the problem that you want to help solve, collaborating with like-minded individuals, and really listening to the target audience or to the group of people that you want to help impact. By listening to Filipino youth in tech, the Filipinos in tech, the women in tech around the world. That was when WeTech as a whole was able to adjust its advocacy and adopt different programs that we never thought we would have to if not for listening to the voices of our different community members. So know that, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I have one question. So I know that you, when you were in the Philippines and only based in the Philippines at first, you did the day-long like tech conference where you had people come speak and you had, girls come to the conference. So I just wanted to ask, like, because I know at first when you have an organization and you don't have any connections, it's sort of hard to build these events and make yourself seem credible. So how did you build connections to be able to expand the organization to do all these things?
That is an excellent question, and it gives me a really great opportunity to talk about how it was like networking. And I think that's like the key tool for how we built up like our credibility and connections as an organization, especially in the beginning. To be very frank, like a lot of people did not take us seriously as an organization because we weren't registered at the beginning. Because to be registered, your founder needs to be 18, and I started at 15. And another part is that because we were mostly student led, we were entirely student led. We didn't have, and I mean, in the Philippines, for context, like there aren't a lot of youth led organizations. So a lot of the companies that we approached wouldn't take us seriously when they heard that we're student run, that we didn't have an office, that we weren't registered. So it really led to us having to send so many cold emails, me having to attend all these conferences, and just like elevator pitching WeTech and hoping that people would be willing to collaborate with us. And in that process, I think there was a lot of rejection, not gonna lie. For all like the 10 emails, for batches of 10 emails we'd send out, perhaps only one or two would even go answered. And usually those would take a while to work out. And I think the most important thing that we should all remember when networking is that it's totally normal to to face all of these obstacles, and it is going to be tough to put a new idea out there, a new venture out there. But what's important is that you believe in it. And I know that sounds so cliche, but if you believe and genuinely are invested in the problem that you want to help solve, the rejections, I think, get less and less painful as they come. And sooner or later, and in the case of WeTech, this is what happened, you have a breakthrough. Because one time I was at this tech conference that I technically wasn't eligible to attend because I was a high school student, but I snuck in as like press, and I registered VTech was VTech was still a blog, so I registered as a press representative. And so I go into this tech conference, and basically I wanted to leave the moment I stepped in because it was basically mostly guys and I saw no other teenagers. And when I approached the different startup booths to try to network, they weren't giving me the time of day. They were like, why are you here? Why aren't you in school? So they weren't very nice. But sooner or later I went to the main stage and I listened to this panel about the Philippine startup scene. And I noticed that there was no mention of the lack of diversity in tech, and there was only one woman in the entire panel. So during the Q&A, I raised my hand, I elevator pitched WeTech, and I connected it to a question about what was being done to diversify the tech scene in the Philippines. And although the speakers didn't give me a good response, they were basically like, oh, it's so nice that youth are like leading the way. They just said that and just kind of like a pat on the back sort of thing. So very condescending, didn't really help. What did help though was how people heard my elevator pitch about WiTech as I asked the question, and were later on approaching me saying that they wanted to connect with me or learn about the organization. And one of the people that approached me was actually a representative from the Philippine government that invited me to my very first speaking opportunity for over 4,000 entrepreneurs across the Southeast Asian region. So that was the breakthrough, I think, that led to all these opportunities and like an increase in credibility for the organization. Looking back, that opportunity would not have come if I didn't really like make the opportunity happen, if I didn't raise my hand, do the elevator pitch, and like put myself and WiTech out there. So I hope that helps.
I wanted to ask if you had like moments of like self-doubt, and if you did, how you dealt with that.
Mhm. Definitely, definitely. So especially when WiTech was at its beginning stages, when I was in like grade 10, grade 11, I experienced a lot of moments when I thought like, is what I'm doing enough? Is what I'm doing actually helping people? And I know that that's totally normal because I've talked to my other friends in nonprofits and they've also felt the same way. When you're very invested in the problem that you want to help solve, I think you're always going to feel like what you're doing isn't enough unless you're seeing like tangible results, right? But I think with a problem like the lack of diversity in STEM, the gender gap, lack of accessibility, it's going to take a while before we see the results, see the work that we're putting in like come into fruition, simply because the girls that we're impacting at WeTech, I realized, are still in the process of going into the field of STEM. Like they're still in the process of choosing STEM as their potential college courses, or taking internships and going to the field. So it's going to take a while before we see the actual tangible results come about. With that said, if you're thinking of starting something or just want to consider like the possibility of starting like a company or a nonprofit, know that it's totally normal to feel those moments of self-doubt, and know that I think the thing that really helped me personally overcome that self-doubt was remembering that it's better to do something rather than doing nothing. I think a lot of teenagers, not to like shade or like our generation or anything, but I feel like a lot of teenagers like to complain about like the problems in our, or actually not just teenagers, just like people in general, like to complain a lot about issues in our society. And I think that while it's important to talk about the problems in our society, what's more important is talking about how to solve those problems in our society. And when we embrace that and really think about the fact that we're doing something, that's when like the self-doubt goes away. And I had this really good conversation with my dad when WeTech was still transitioning from a blog into an organization. And I was asking him, like, do you think this is gonna work? Is this actually going to do anything? Is this just like a waste of time? And I remember that he told me that if it fails, at least you can say you've tried and like learn something in that process. And if it succeeds, then like that will help so many people. And I just clung to that possibility of helping people and from learning from that experience. So yeah, I think if you decide to launch something or just want to chat more about like experiences of like self-doubt, like let me know. But yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
I also had a question. When you were starting out by yourself, were you ever scared that no one would want to like join you in what you were trying to do, if that makes sense?
There were a lot of moments, yes, where I felt like, is this going to, I thought to myself, how am I going to convince people to join like the advocacy, right? And I think that those moments of doubt, I think, were very, very brief for me because I decided to just dive headfirst into like the networking, and just I had this mindset that if people turn me down and like when I asked to like recruit them, they turn me down, and let's just like move on to the next person. So I had that very like thank you next kind of like mindset, and that ended up really helping the beginning stages of VTech because of the fact that I think a lot of the time when I approached different girls in tech that I had networked with online or met up with in person, a lot of them would say that they related to the problem that I was trying to help solve in terms of the gender gap. And if ever like they turned me down, it wasn't because like they didn't believe it was a problem or didn't think it was a pressing issue. It was because they said that they didn't have time or they were just like overbooked, that sort of thing. I think a key takeaway is to approach people and just don't be afraid of getting rejected, but at the same time know that people that are meant for your organization are usually people that have the same level of like investment and wanting to help solve the problem as you do. And I know that sounds very vague and that's very hard to measure, but I feel like the people that have really helped WeTech grow as a whole are the ones that are like me, in the sense that like we stay up and we like send each other articles about the gender gap. We talk about these like issues for hours. We spend like time on like 3 hour like Zoom calls during planning. And these are the people that you know are in it for the right reasons. Yeah, that's what I meant. Because I think a lot of the time when we're thinking about recruiting people, there tends to be people that join for the CV or for the resume or the common app, and you want to kind of avoid that and instead get people that are really there to help approach advocacy because they want to just make things better rather than like do it out of like self-interest, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
I'll ask like one final question. So there was a lot of moments in your presentation when you said that people said like really condescending things to you. And I know like you mentioned like, oh, you just kind of brushed it aside, but has anyone ever said something that you really took to heart? And if you did, and if that has happened, how did you sort of like move past it and keep going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there have been a lot. Yeah, like whenever I talk kind of about my story, I do realize that like a lot of what society told me growing up was very much trying to, as if like there were a lot of gender stereotypes is what I have to say about like growing up in the Philippines. And I think that also comes from just like the patriarchal society as a whole that like permeates spaces like Southeast Asia. But definitely that comment made by my teacher saying that I wasn't a good fit for tech really stuck with me the most, because I had this mindset that if it was like my classmates or people my age saying that like I didn't belong in tech, I would be like, oh, they, they're my peers, like they don't have experience, in tech, or like they're not working yet. Like I had like an inner voice that kind of told myself to not listen to them. But with the teacher, it's different, because growing up, we're conditioned to really listen to our teachers and see them as like authority figures. And to have an authority figure, somebody with like over 10 years of experience in STEM, tell me that she didn't think that I was a good fit for STEM, like that really made me second guess myself. And that was a comment that took me a while to remove from my head. And to this day, like I still remember it, but like now when I talk about it, it's less of a negative experience and more of a, this is what really catalyzed my journey, I guess, with WeTech. Because as much as the comments stung when I got it, as negative criticism tends to do, I think I realized that without that comment, I don't think I would have gone into like that rabbit hole search about the gender gap in tech. And I don't think I would have been pushed as hard to research and really learn more about women in tech. And I was also really driven by this realization that as much as I wasn't deterred to leave tech because of that teacher's comment, I was pushed really to go deeper into tech because of it. Usually like that isn't the case, I think, for a lot of young girls that receive like negative criticism from teachers. So I felt like, okay, I want to do something to make sure that the next time a girl receives a comment from a teacher, from an adult that discourages them from entering STEM, like I want to help make sure that WeTech as a community that's there to like counteract that criticism and help support the girls out there.
Thank you. Do either of you have any more questions that you guys want to ask? Okay, so I think we'll just end here for today then. Thank you so much, Audrey, for speaking. Your story was super inspiring and I love listening to you talk. And do you have any like final words you want to say before we end for today?
Yeah, Yeah, first off, thank you so much for having me. It was super fun speaking today. If you guys want to connect or have any follow-up questions, I can talk more about like recruitment if that's something of interest, or like the technicalities of starting a nonprofit. Anything like that, feel free to DM me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active, or like email me over there if you have any more follow-ups. And besides that, I think parting words would be that if you have like an idea or just an organization that you're building up, like know that nothing has to be perfect. Personally, I think like I have quite like perfectionist tendencies. So I felt like at the beginning of WiTech, like I had to follow like this like 10-step plan and like follow all these like monthly goals. But really it didn't end up like becoming that. And it was really about like listening to the community and just like learning from there. So if ever there's any way I can help, please let me know. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for speaking. Thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, that's it for today.